Well, hey there, everybody. Really glad to have you with us tonight. Always appreciate those that have a serious desire to study. Been watching the numbers very carefully, of course, all this time. It's being our 15th class. And I'm really pleased to say that it looks like we've certainly leveled off at over 100 who are the full-time students, the stormtroopers and the hardcore ones that are really going to see this through. So this crew that we hired on our boat so long ago seems to be sticking with it and become pretty good deckhands too. You have been repeatedly asking, regularly asking for additional material. Again, today I had somebody looking for the Ed Wharton classes, audio only, that were on another website. So you've had to search through several different places. But it's been just great. We have new students coming in every week. I get just so many of these cards and letters now, most encouraging. So thank you. Let's go viral, keep spreading the good word there, and we'll just bring in, the rest of the world if we just have time enough to do it. I wanted to mention some feedback from one of my students here a week or two ago now, but he sent me a link, and I don't have the link for you this evening, to a great video, 20 minutes long, of a young couple's first time on the Temple Mount. And so I can't give you the link, as I said, but if you'll search for Sergio, S-E-R-G-I-O, Sergio and Rhoda, R-H-O-D-A, Sergio and Rhoda in Israel. Use that as your search term. You'll likely be able to find their website pretty easily. It's kind of an odd website. It won't be what you expect if it's bringing you to the same place I did. They have a map with lots of pins on it for the places that they visited. So apparently they've done a lot of videos. I have watched only the one on the Temple Mount. So you're looking for Sergio and Rhoda in Israel on the Temple Mount. And it was really a lot of fun. They were first timers. They had 4K camera in their phone, but not a professional crew by any means, and it shows. But their enthusiasm was heartwarming and reminded me of my own time after time that I've been up on the Mount. But they did an unusually good job with a lot of post-production and have woven into the video now a great deal of material with maps and other photographs and drone video. They did just a superb job in putting together a complete presentation in 20 minutes on a small number of locations, but well done. So I really want to recommend that, Sergio and Rhoda in Israel on the Temple Mount. If you will send me an email, as you see at the bottom of the screen there, I'd be more than happy to send you the actual link. So if it doesn't pop up for you, I can forward it to you. You go ahead and ask. Now let's go ahead and plunge directly into our study for this evening. I want to review what we've seen so far, remembering that Matthew 23 is the foundation for everything that happens in Matthew 24. Reading Matthew 24 sans the context, which is chapter 23, already is crippling you to some extent. So in Matthew chapter 23, we saw the who that's involved, who are the scribes, the Pharisees, and Jerusalem. All three are specifically named, and all three are rather vigorously condemned. We also saw the what. What's going to happen is that the house will be left to them desolate. We talked about how it was that you could think of the house as the temple itself or as the nation. Both are true, both came to pass, both were left desolate. So it really doesn't matter which you pick, they're both certainly what took place. You also, number 3, see the why of it all. There's this very long list of sins throughout all of Matthew 23, and ending, of course, with a recent murder that had taken place within the temple courtyards themselves. Number 4, we have the where stipulated. Jerusalem is named. And lastly, we have the when. Quote, all these things will come upon this generation in Matthew 23, verse 36. So the underlying foundation for all of Matthew 24 is the fact that the apostles were standing with Jesus in the court of the women where the alms were brought and collected beneath the 15 semicircle steps that led up to the Nicanor Gate, as I showed you last week, and just astonishing glory and opulent wealth that went into the creation of that particular courtyard. And then they're told that their house is being left to them desolate. So what I think I'd like to do tonight is to restate something I haven't really quite done, Matthew chapter 23, in this manner. The who is the first century Jews, but it's not the planet. It is not possible to find the planet in chapter 23. Matter of fact, I've never known anybody, no matter how deeply steeped and committed they were to premillennialism or any other mistaken form of eschatology, there's just nobody who thinks that the planet ever entered anybody's mind in Matthew 23. Number two, again, with regard to the what, the temple, the city, the Jews are all going to be destroyed. But they are stipulated as the only people in the context that we're talking about. It's not the planet. You cannot find a global judgment there. Number three is the why, more specifically than I had on the previous slide. They are told that they will scourge in their synagogues and persecute and even kill prophets and wise men and scribes. But while this may not be believed by some of my students here tonight, and we haven't had prophets since the first century. We're not going to get more prophets ever again. A study of miracles and their purpose clearly shows, I have a 5-part lesson, maybe I'll do one of these days after Revelation, that beyond all conceivable doubt, the New Testament was written in the first century, completed in the first century. I personally believe every book was written prior to the fall of Jerusalem, and that then brought to an end any need for further prophets. The inspired men were inspired for the purpose of bringing us our New Testament. Once we have it, we have the fullness of God's revelation. There isn't any more that's going to come. He says so in those books. So if we're talking about a people being held accountable for the death of the prophets, you and I are not accountable for that. We're not responsible for killing any prophets. We didn't do it. It has to be limited to the first century. The where is Jerusalem and not the planet. The when is this generation. That's their generation, not our generation. It's just emphatically true. So anybody suggests otherwise is wrong. The scriptures exist to guide us into the truth. The scriptures are meant to be understood. It's not arrogance or conceit to know the truth, because Jesus said we would, and it would set us free. So here's an outline of Matthew 24. And again, in previous lessons, I haven't given you an outline like this, so you might want to jot some of this down. But verses 1 and 2 have the apostles just being told at the end of Matthew 23 that their house was going to be destroyed, pointing at those temple buildings and just asking Jesus, I think begging Jesus, to give them more information. What in the world? How could it be? They're so, very well built, so well fortified, so well defended, and so expensive and beautiful. Well, how could this be? So in verse 3, they ask two questions. When and what will be the sign that the house will be left desolate? Verses 4 through 13 tell us what the sign is not. There's a lot of things that will be the beginning of birth pangs that are listed in those 10 verses, but none of them are supposed to provoke any fear or excitement or upset. It's not the sign. And then in verse 14, he now directly answers the when question. When will the end of these buildings come? When the gospel is preached in all, the word I couldn't pronounce, we studied, very thoroughly, that represents at that point in time the Roman Empire. It could represent other empires at different times and other geographical boundaries. That we just found Josephus thought of more than one in his day. But when the gospel is preached in all of the Roman Empire, their particular time frame and extent, then the end would come. And I showed you at least 4 passages which say that gospel was preached in all of that area that Jesus stipulated here. in 57 and 62 AD, just to name two of the epistles we looked at. And then in verse 15, we have what the sign is. The second question is answered directly in Luke 21, a parallel passage, Luke 21:20. Jerusalem surrounded by armies is the abomination of desolation. You take the two parallel passages, Matthew's account, Luke's account. Jesus said both of those things. Each of those men recorded only one, but we put together both of what Jesus said in the abomination of desolation is Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Then in verses 16 through 28, they are told what to do when they see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Flee for their lives and don't be deceived before that sign appears or after. Don't let anybody be telling you Jesus is here, Jesus is there, he's hiding in the wilderness. This is not going to be like that. So don't be deceived. When the abomination of desolation comes, he will have been sent by the Son of Man. Then that means that the Son of Man has come, and he is going to repay to every man according to his deeds. So the Son of Man's coming is when the apostles, have finished preaching, and it's what the sign is, the abomination of desolation, which they'll see with their own eyes, Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Run. Run for your life and don't let anybody deceive you to do otherwise. In 29 through 31, tonight, the only verses we'll look at, these three, we are told what the Son of Man's coming is going to be like. This is the description of the Son of Man's coming. Got quite a list of things that are the component parts and various aspects of this momentous event. And then next week, I think everything's going to work out this way now. I have, some firm convictions on this. And of course, I hope I haven't overdone it, but I've sure thoroughly done it. Hopefully we can get through chapter 24, verse 32 through 51 next week. And we'll have what I'm calling parables, but you see I put it in quotations. That's not exactly all of them parables, but they are illustrations. They are, figures that they can see as examples and relate to about the Son of Man's coming, and one particular aspect of that coming, which we're going to thoroughly investigate next week. So there's your outline of Matthew chapter 24. I was thinking about tonight's class, and I hit on this illustration. If Matthew chapter 24, was or were, whichever singular or plural we're supposed to use there, Matthew 24 were an atom, then verses 29 through 31 would be the nucleus. This is really the core. It's also the battleground. These are the verses that really stand out, that are obviously the most curious, that we have to decide whether or not there's any figurative or symbolic nature to them. Interpreting them is all important. Everything else we've seen so far, and what we'll be looking at next week, is tremendously important. I guess you don't have an atom without those electrons, but all these other things are, as you see in the illustration, they are revolving around that nucleus. We certainly have got to get it all right, but we need to get these three verses right, 29, 30, and 31. So in the most meticulous manner, we need to scrutinize these three verses tonight. This is just, is really hardcore digging that we're going to do. We need to put these verses under our very highest powered microscope, make sure we get it figured out. So first, I just want to read them, and I very much want you to read them with me. And in this case, I'm not going to put them up on the screen yet. I would like for you to look at your own Bible. Now, we're going to look at all these verses, of course, and every word in them. But for right now, please, will you turn to Matthew 24 and whatever you're using. So many phones out there, I know, and computers, and more power to you. I certainly haven't been able to live without mine since 1984. But if you've got a hard text like I still prefer and believe ought to be your primary method of studying, I was an early adapter of the technologies, and I'm fairly fluent in them, I suppose. I've had a computer longer than most people have. I owned the very first copy of Bible software, or a copy of the first program that was ever written. which, by the way, was written by members of the Church of Christ down in Texas. Just the history of software and Bible study. Rather proud to say, it was my people, it was our people, it was members of the Church of Christ who first saw the need, put in an enormous amount of time and effort, and created the very first software program for Bible study. CompuBible it was called, and it was great. I used it for years. I'm using PC Study Bible now. But I still think paper works the best for putting your notes down, for working with it. That's personal opinion. I'm an old timer, old dogs, new tricks, and all of that. So you use whatever you see fit. But come with me now to verse 29, 30, and 31. I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible, the updated version, here this evening. So here's what it says. Verse 29. 2,000 years after the tribulation of those days. Oops. Maybe you've got a translation that says that. I'm real sure I don't. You know how I love to pull that trick on you. It's just my favorite little teaching device. When you substitute what other people believe in the place of what the Scripture says, it is the single most striking way I know to teach the falsity of these other views. They just do not even touch the hem of the garment of what the passage actually says. So the reason this is the nucleus of all of our problems, and so important then to a proper understanding of both this chapter and the whole book of Revelation, which begins with the next verse in Matthew chapter 24. Never forget, the 7th verse of Revelation's first chapter is the next verse that we're going to be studying here, verse 30 in Matthew 24. And it surely does not begin in 29 with 2,000 years after this tribulation. It says immediately. Now there are currently 130 million people in just the United States. According to census and all the surveys that have been done for several decades now, 130 million people who believe that these verses are speaking of the end of the world, who believe that these verses did not take place in that generation, as the 34th verse, only 5 verses later, requires. It says so. These verses have to take place in that generation, or Jesus lied, is a fool, or fumbled the inspired word at this point. He made a mistake of all mistakes in capital letters. If these things that we're reading in 29, 30, and 31 do not take place in that generation, as Jesus says they will in verse 34, then Jesus is not the Son of God. He is not the Messiah. His death is meaningless, pointless, and valueless. If verses 29, 30, and 31 did not come to pass, were not fulfilled in that generation. Because to be the Son of God, to be our Messiah, Savior, sacrifice for sins, he has to be right all the time. Make him one mistake, and he is disqualified in everything else that he taught and that we believe. So it's immediately after the tribulation of those days, the immediate adjacent time frame of everything we've discussed so far, that the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect, that is, his chosen ones, from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. I've now put them up on the screen. Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31, which then 3 verses later, must take place in that generation where Jesus is a failure and a fraud and ought to be ignored. Gospels now are a waste of time. They're just pure fiction. Well, of course, I don't believe that, and I don't think any of you do, or you wouldn't be here with me tonight. So let me take these words and arrange them line by line now to identify certain component parts as we start to look under our microscope and break this down. Verse 29, for instance, says, immediately after the tribulation of those days. Those days. Well, what days are those days? Was there a transition between verses 28 and 29? Did Jesus get off that horse and onto another one in the middle of his thought stream? Is there something clearly in the text of the end of 28 or start of 29 that will create a 2,000-year gap? Well, absolutely not. So what days are they? The same days the apostles asked their 2 questions about. When will these things take place? When will these things happen? And what will be the sign when all these things will come to pass? And it says, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. You know, there it is, the convention of the New American Standard. Love it, very helpful, to put in all caps when you have a quotation from the Old Testament. Get instant recognition. Hey, this is a quote from the Old Testament, or somewhere in the Old Testament you can read these words. Well, great. It's an Old Testament quote. But where? And what was it talking about there? If I can understand it in the Old Testament, then I'll understand it the way the people that received this message, these apostles, got it and how they thought about it. And I'll understand it, I think, the way Jesus wants us to, which is correctly and not fantastically and fabulously with all these wild ideas that, you know, are so popular that 130 million people can buy them. Verse 30 says, and then. Now, we talked about that word. It means at that time. It's translated at that time in this context. So this word, is it a transition? Is Jesus jerking us away from what he had been talking about? Jumping over, 20,000 league boots or whatever they call those, you'd have to use to get over 2,000 years. No. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, in the New American Standard. But is that the best way to translate the Greek words? I maintain no, it's not. In fact, it inverts the very purpose of the verse and misleads you into the opposite thought of what it actually said. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And again, it uses this word, tota, I think it is. Then, at that time, all the tribes of the earth will mourn. But, we saw there were 3 different words for earth. And the translators, they don't tell us which of the 3 Greek words they're using when they translate it the single Greek word earth, or English word earth. So when we see earth, every time our eyes should open, our minds should open, and we should say, well, wait a minute, which Greek word for earth is here in this sentence? It will change your view entirely on what the subject is there, and what tribes we're talking about, where they live, and how extensive their habitation might be. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet. They will gather together his elect from the 4 winds, and we've seen a lot of capital letters here, and from one end of the sky to the other, this gathering is going to take place. So all I tried to do here is take these 3 verses and show you just a very few, really, quite a few questions that arise. We all know what most people have been led to believe. We all know what the broad understanding is, that path that most people walk on, the one that leads to destruction. We all know what is the favorite way that just everybody thinks this should be understood, whether they have the least bit of interest in serving God in any other way or not. Virtually everybody thinks they can say with confidence, oh yeah, those are the verses that haven't happened yet. And they're talking about the end of the world, the end of the whole universe, in fact. It's all about the second coming when he'll destroy the planet and all things, physical and material. Well, no. Absolutely no. Certainly no. There isn't anything in this chapter that will permit it. It is disallowed. I'd go so far as to say, if you're just an honest Bible student, the words forbid what 130 million people just in the United States are so convinced of. It's just not so. So we need to really bore down into this, don't we? We're going to look in the microscope there, but I promise you, I'm not going to get too carried away. Truly, I could see 1 hour on each verse. I was just throwing away material verses, like you can't imagine for tonight. There is just so much material that teaches what I'm presenting to you. So make no mistake, my convictions are not conceit. They are convictions. They're well studied. They are certainly supported by what the scriptures teach. I'm as dogmatic as I can get about it because I believe Jesus is the Messiah, and his lordship depends on what he says in Matthew 24. If what he said in Matthew 24 doesn't happen in the time frame he gave us, then he's a false prophet. And we need to be dogmatic about that. We need to be confident. We need to be convicted people. We need to know that truth. Now, I know everybody thinks they do. So we have to be sure about it. I'm spending a lot of time in the hope that I can convince you that with sufficient comparisons, particularly the Old Testament, you won't make a mistake. You can't make a mistake. If you ask and seek and knock, you will receive and find, and the door will be open. Christ himself has guaranteed that. Bet on it. Count on it. Camp on it. Live on it. Build your house on that rock. But make sure you're one of those people, that you're not flippant and negligent and careless, and really not very committed. Let's be Christians and Bible students in fact and not just in name only. So, you all have a copy of the syllabus. Yeah, white balance isn't working there. So this is page number 14 here. And I've just put a square, a rectangle there in red around the section that I'm blowing up for you right here. I am not going to take the time to look at all these passages. But if you just go down the column on the left, we're going to find passages in the Old Testament for the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light, stars falling from the sky, powers of the heavens being shaken, coming on the clouds, sign of the Son of Man, tribes of the earth mourning, the angels gathering his elect, and then this generation not passing away until they all take place. Those last four we'll also be studying, but particularly in the upper half of that chart, you can go and look at those verses throughout the week, and for further study. And of course, there's many more. I truly believe from now on, every time you read, you're just going to be stumbling all over the Old Testament corroboration of what Jesus said. And the Old Testament then explanation and key to these expressions. So let's look at just a few tonight. I hope enough to convince you, or at least to stimulate you to study, some more. In 24:29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Rather than running all over the Bible like I have every other time that I've taught this material, and that's 9 times teaching Revelation, but it's quite a few more times than that when I'm just teaching Matthew 24 and study the Gospels or study on eschatology or some such. But tonight what I'm going to do is just stick with Isaiah 13. You're going to need to turn over there. We're going to read the whole chapter. Isaiah 13 has so many of these expressions in it that I'm going to use it now for the foundation of much of the rest of this class here tonight. So Isaiah 13, every word we're going to read. So are you ready? Open your Bible, go ahead and get your software turned to the 13th chapter of Isaiah. What I'm going to do is just read it and then comment on the fly. So we'll be stuck on this particular slide for quite a while. I just want to do, verse by verse presentation. But first, in chapter 13, let's figure out who it is written to and about. It's about the people it's written to. When a scripture tells you to whom the prophecy is addressed, it's telling you about whom the things in the prophecy will, fall, about whom it's talking. You're going to get the to and the about when you find out the who is. So what's the first verses, 4 first words say? Well, I'm not going to, trick you like I did last time. I just love playing Jack-in-the-Box there. But it's the oracle concerning Babylon. So if you start teaching that this is about Egypt, what are you? You are wrong in all capital letters. And you cannot possibly be right. And if you come up, as so many people do in Matthew 24, they state this with just such great confidence. Well, he's talking about many different things at the same time. One set of words could be talking about Babylon back there, but it could mean Egypt somewhere else, and San Francisco in another place, or China, or the whole planet. And they just make it up as they go along. This is called adding to the scriptures. And it is expressly forbidden in passage after passage after passage in both our Old and New Testaments. So, hey, how about this? Let's just believe what God said and leave it at that. Let's stop putting words in God's mouth. This whole idea about dual fulfillment's one of those that just makes me want to tear my hair out. Where'd you ever get such an idea? And if it is there, there'll be something in the context to tell you that it's there. There's one passage that I think maybe could be fulfilled in 2 different places. And you know why I think that? Because I've got an inspired commentary that tells me so in my New Testament. But lacking that inspired commentary, I do not choose to be so confident that I could tell God what he meant and start adding the oracle concerning Babylon, Egypt, China, and Russia in the 21st century. That is forbidden by the God of heaven. This is an oracle about Babylon. Look over in verse 19 of this chapter. Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It gets more personal in chapter 14. Look at verse 3. It'll be in the day when Yahweh gives you rest from your pain and turmoil and harsh service in which you have been enslaved. You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. So here's what you'll be saying when you taunt the king of Babylon. So now if you'll turn the page, as I have to do in my Bible, but let's suppose you come over to verse 12 in chapter 14. And it says, how you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, which very few translations say anymore, because it's an invented word, and it's wrong. And it's too bad that the King James put it in. But there aren't any really reputable or newer translations that do that anymore. You really have to go back to the King James to get Lucifer in there. And where did the idea that Satan's name is Lucifer come from? Look carefully at your screen, brethren. It came from thin air. There is absolutely no evidence to support that idea anywhere in 66 books of the Bible. But an unfortunate King James translation 409 years ago, a mistake they made, perhaps in all honesty, people grabbed it, turned it into Satan, ran with it. But brethren, it's talking about a man And it says so in verse 16, and Satan is not a man. So look, let's just be happy with what God said. Isn't it good enough for you? You need to twist it and abuse it and morph it into something that he never said? And it pains me, as you can tell. I have good friends, leaders, men even who are called elders, who are still teaching that Isaiah 14 is talking about Satan, and it just makes me want to weep. It isn't. It can't be. It's impossible. Let's stop teaching what are pop frauds. It may be popular, but it's just a fraud. So in Isaiah 13, what country alone does the oracle speak about? The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah. Now, bear in mind, of course, we don't have to be stuck with Isaiah. We can also just choose to put in there, Jeremiah said this too, and so did Jesus somewhere, and we just make it up. If I can get Egypt out of Babylon, if I can get today out of then, why not change it Isaiah? It isn't even Isaiah. That's just a figure. It means Jeremiah did it. Brethren, once you are unanchored, once you are unmoored to the scriptures, once you set yourself free from the truth, if you're going to change Babylon into the end of the world, then you can change anything you want, can't you? We don't have to stick to anything Isaiah says. We'll just make it up as we go along. Or we could be disciples of God, Christ, in this book. The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw. Lift up a standard on the bare hill. Raise your voice to them. Wave the hand that they may enter the doors of the nobles. I have commanded my consecrated ones. Get your highlighters out. I have my own little scheme in Isaiah 13. I used a yellow highlighter for my consecrated ones. I have commanded my consecrated ones. I have even called my mighty warriors. So I highlighted my mighty warriors, my proudly exulting ones, to execute my anger. A sound of tumult on the mountains, like that of many people. A sound of the uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathered together. I'm going to highlight now the next 4 lines in yellow. Yahweh of hosts is mustering the army for battle. They are coming from a far country, from the farthest horizons. Yahweh and his instruments of indignation. So now I've highlighted in verse 3, my consecrated ones, my mighty warriors, my proudly exulting ones, and they are the army for battle coming from a far country, the farthest horizons, the instruments of indignation that are coming with Yahweh. But this is about Babylon. Whatever's coming is falling on Babylon, and Yahweh is coming with his consecrated ones, his mighty warriors, his army that he mustered from the far country's farthest horizons, the instruments of his indignation. The passage says, Babylon, you're in a world of hurt because Yahweh is coming. And when he does, he's bringing an army that he mustered of nations from a far country. They are the instruments of indignation. So he will wield them against you. When Yahweh comes, they came. Now, nobody's ever going to see Yahweh. They're not going to look up and see Yahweh. But they're sure enough going to see those armies. Now, if you still got your yellow highlighter in your hand, skip over to verse 17 in this chapter. Behold, I am going to stir up the Medes against them. Full stop. There aren't many Medes these days. It isn't about anything but those days. The Medes and the Persians, of course, Daniel 2, you remember the statue, they came. They destroyed Babylon. They captured it all. They took it over. They were the consecrated ones, the mighty warriors of Yahweh. They were the army mustered for battle. They in fact came from a far country, the farthest horizons, and the Medes and Persians are the instruments of Yahweh's indignation. Nobody sees Yahweh. Everybody saw the Medes. Yahweh was up in heaven, invisible, in charge. Yahweh mustered his troops, gave them their marching orders, directed their every assault, and gave them their victory. And nobody ever saw that general. He was in heaven. But the instruments of his indignation were the pawns on his chessboard. Make no mistake, the Medes and the Persians didn't think they were serving God, but they were. Back to verse 6. Wail, for the day of Yahweh is near. That's usually translated day of the Lord. The word is Yahweh or Jehovah. The J's are Y's in Hebrew. But however you pronounce it, it is that God, our God, the Creator God, the only God, who was near. He was coming in the form and by means of the instruments of his indignation. Wail when you see that army coming, for the day of Yahweh is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will fall limp. Every man's heart will melt, and they will be terrified. Pains and anguish will take hold of them. They'll writhe like a woman in labor. They'll look at one another in astonishment, their faces aflame. Behold, the day of Yahweh is coming, cruel, with fury and burning anger, to make the land guess what? To make the land of Babylon, not the world, not the planet, not the solar system, not the universe. Babylon, a desolation. And terminology I hope we're bearing a lot of fruit here tonight that you'll recognize. He will exterminate its sinners from it. I labored mightily in previous lessons to show you several passages in the Gospel of Matthew where there's going to be this reaping. And we're going to take the bad ones out, but we're going to keep the good ones right where they always were. We're not taking them both out of the world. We're taking the bad ones out from the good ones and leaving the good ones on the earth. He will exterminate its sinners from it, but he's going to leave the others. 10. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises. The moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless, and I will take all men off planet Earth because it's a worldwide judgment and there won't be any of it left. Did it again, didn't I? That is what no Bible says. That may be what people teach, but it isn't what Isaiah said. And he was the mouthpiece of God. Brethren, I will make mortal man scarcer, not extinct. Mankind in the gold of Ophir. Gold is rare, but there is some. I will make the heavens tremble and the earth shaken from its place. With that last sentence, we have all four component parts of verse 29. We have the sun, we have the moon, we have the stars, and we have the heavens. We have the darkness, we have the shaking. We have the capitalized words because Jesus was referring to terminology well known to Isaiah's students about a nation's fall when the God of heaven, in heaven, and from heaven moves a physical army across the face of the earth as the instruments of his indignation to lay waste and desolate that land down there. Then it says, 13, I'll make the heavens tremble, the earth is shaken from its place at the fury of the Lord of hosts, Yahweh of hosts, in the day of his burning anger. And it'll be like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather. They'll each turn to his own people. When this judgment is over, there are still people you can go to. Each will flee to his own land. When the world has been destroyed in verse 11, it is only the Babylonian world, not the planet. There will still be other lands people can flee to when the Medes come. And anyone who is found will be thrust through. Anyone who's captured will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, their wives ravished. That means raped. Brethren, is that what you think Jesus is coming to do at the end of the world? Now, I know the Medes did it, all of it. But is that your picture of the end of the world? Stop twisting Scripture. Stop forcing your lies upon it. It does not teach what millions believe. Satan is good at what he does, and deception and lies is the name of the game. When the blind lead the blind, they both fall in a ditch. Get used to it, but stay out of the ditch. It'll always be here, but stay out of the ditch. Stay on the page. Stay in the Scriptures. So, in verse 17, behold, I'm going to stir up the Medes against them being the Babylonians, who will not value silver or take pleasure in gold. Bows will mow down young men. They'll not even have compassion on the fruit of the womb, nor will their eye pity children. And Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah fell hard. Not much left, but the planet's still here. Not about the planet when you're talking about darkened sun and moon and stars and powers being shaken. 20, it will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation, nor will the Arab pitch his tent there, nor will shepherds make their flocks lie down there, but desert creatures will lie down there. Their houses will be full of owls, ostriches also will live there, shaggy goats will frolic there, hyenas will howl in their fortified towers, jackals in their luxurious palaces. Her fateful time also will soon come, and her days will not be prolonged. So, brethren, what's it about? It's about Babylon. But what's it about in Matthew 24 when the 34th verse says all these things will come upon this generation, when Jerusalem is named, when the scribes and Pharisees are named, when they're pointing at the temple buildings, when they're told not one stone will be left here? Don't you add to Scripture. God will hold you to account if you do. You'll answer for that. You can't claim, well, somebody else I respected taught it. So you were blind following the blind. Into the ditch you go. Don't be blind. Now then, brethren, let's go a little bit faster through the remainder of these. I told you I really wanted to get as much as I could out of Isaiah. So we have in verse 30 now this much. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. New American Standards, very poor translation. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Unfortunate translation, just because it's not clear as it could be. And they'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Line by line. Then, at that time, direct time reference, tying it to the same events, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Now get this one, really important. And don't lose any confidence in your Bible. There are some poorer translations and better translations. King James is beautiful. Read it before you go to bed at night, and then get up in the morning, get a good translation to study. New International Version has its place. I love the narrated Bible. But it's not a study Bible. It reads easily, but it's got a lot of mistakes in it. You need to find a New King James. You need to get, a New American Standard, the Old American Standard, English Standard. There's great, translations. And brethren, the Greek scholars, the translators, and the commentators all agree. There's really no doubt about this. It's not some big deal that I'm making up. Number one, they agree on this. The Greek word can be either sky or heaven at the end of that phrase. This uranos, however you pronounce it properly, is a word that in context can refer to what you look up at and clouds are in, or it can talk about heaven where God is and you've never seen it. Same word's used for both, only context will tell. So context will tell, here like everywhere else. And number two, this is the most important part of this. Either the sign is up there in the sky or in heaven, or the Son of Man is up there in the sky or in heaven. The verse can be read either way. And again, 2 weeks ago, I checked with ones familiar with the Greek language. There is no doubt, I'm not making it up, search for yourself. The Greek word order doesn't matter so much as English does. The word order, when you stick to it in the English way of thinking, comes out like this, but it doesn't mean that in the context. So look at this. This is the better way to translate this so that it can all happen in that generation the way Jesus said it was. I'd like for Jesus to remain as the Son of God in my view. I'm pretty willing to hope that, he can still be my sacrifice for sin. I'm going to keep it there in the generation he was talking to. Now that's because I have to. It's because the words say so. And because I'm under no compulsion, to write a book or support some other view. So here's a better way to translate it. The only way that agrees with the context, and all the scholars agree it is translatable, is verifiably justifiable. Then, the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. That is, the sign that the Son of Man is in heaven. The way you can tell he's ruling from heaven. He's up there manipulating the chessboard. You can't see him, but there's a sign that shows he is. And that's going to appear. Now, brethren, I think that sign's the same sign. A lot of signs, really, that we got bundled up in this little galaxy of verses here. But when the abomination of desolation stands in the holy place, and where it ought not, as Luke records it, you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. That's the sign that Jesus is the Son of God, that he's coming like he did on Babylon, that he is mustering his army to desolate the land, like Isaiah said. The sign that the Son of Man is in heaven, not dead, not in a tomb, not dust, but in heaven, ruling, reigning, will appear. And it did. And when that happens, all the tribes of the earth will mourn at that time. Well, let's go back to the scholars and translators, commentators again. The Greek word for earth here is justifiably translated earth. They picked a valid word. But it could also be translated land. And in Matthew chapter 2, verse 6, and 2:20 and 2:21, and then in chapter 4, verse 15, and in John 3:22, and not specifically, but Luke 21:25 through 36 will explain it for you. You'll find such expressions like this. Here's Matthew 2:6. You, Bethlehem, earth of Judah, are by no means least among the princes of Judah. Verse 20, go into the earth of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. Verse 21, Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the earth of Israel. 4:15 in Matthew, the earth of Zebulun and the earth of Naphtali, beyond the Jordan. Oh, you see, I put land in all caps and underlined, as all the translations do. Because they see the Greek could be translated earth or land. It's used as earth when you're talking about planting a seed, putting it in dirt. But the context here, brethren, is not about the planet. Never. It's the land of Judah. It's the land of Israel. It's the land of Zebulun. It's the land of Naphtali. Tribal lands. Now, what might a Jew think of if he was told that all the tribes of the land will mourn when the abomination of desolation comes? in this generation to surround Jerusalem. Will the tribes of the land of Israel mourn then? Well, they did. And so, brethren, it's the King James Version that's a lot of our problem. But it's just not digging that's the biggest part of it. Then all the tribes of the land is a perfectly justifiable way to translate it. And when you do, it's the context and the use of land elsewhere in Matthew. The Son of Man in verse 30 will be coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. In 19 of Isaiah, verses 1 through 4, it's an oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud. But it's an oracle about Egypt when Yahweh rides on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. So I will incite Egyptians against Egyptians. In this case, God moved the chess pieces so that there was a civil war. There are 5 nations that will do these things, some one or more, another all, to fulfill the prophecy. It happened in the physical earth, and there's still an Egyptian land to walk around on today. Verse 3, then the spirit of the Egyptians will be demoralized within them. I'll confound their strategy, so they'll resort to idols and ghosts of the dead and mediums and spiritists. Moreover, I'll deliver the Egyptians into the hand of a cruel master, and a mighty king will rule over them, declares the Lord God. I believe that's actually the Lord Yahweh of hosts. Well, when the Lord rides on a swift cloud, nobody sees him with reins in the mouth of a cloud. But Egypt goes down, and they all saw him. He comes in the form of desolation when he brings his instruments of indignation against you. Verse 30, the Son of Man is coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Let's continue with that thought in Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 1 and 3 and 5 set the stage. If you will return, O Israel, declares the Lord, thus says the Lord to the men of Judah and to Jerusalem, declare in Judah and proclaim in Jerusalem. So there's your verses 1, 3, and 5, portions of them in Jeremiah 4. Now let's read verses 9 through 13. It shall come about in that day, declares Yahweh, that the heart of the king and the heart of the princes will fail, and the priests will be appalled, and the prophets will be astounded. And then I said, Lord Yahweh, surely you've utterly deceived this people and Jerusalem, those people as opposed to any other people, and that town as opposed to any other, saying you'll have peace, whereas a sword touches the throat. Now Jeremiah is suggesting that, Lord, you promised us peace, but now you're saying we're not going to get it. And so, he's concerned about it. Well, God promises both if you don't behave. And so he's getting straightened out here. And we continue. In that time, it will be said to this people and Jerusalem, a scorching wind from the bare heights in the wilderness in the direction of the daughter of my people, not to winnow, not to cleanse, a wind too strong for this will come at my command. Now I will also pronounce judgments against them. That is, Israel, Judah, Jerusalem, this people, Jerusalem, this people, Jerusalem. I'll pronounce judgments against them and nobody else in this passage. Behold, he goes up like clouds, and his chariots like the whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined. Now in this case, I'll grant you, I'm not even sure if the pronouns there refer to God or the nation that's coming against them, Babylon in this case. I'm not sure, and it doesn't matter. The concept of coming on the clouds of the sky has to do with the fact that anybody who can ride a cloud is not somebody you can shoot an arrow at. It's not somebody you can defeat. It's not somebody you have any hope of conquering or withstanding. If he's riding on the clouds, you are cooked, baby. You're going down. This is all this has ever meant to the Jews. 24:31, and I realize I might run over a little bit now. 24:31's first part, he will send forth his angels. We all teach this, we all say this, we all know that angels don't have to be winged, spiritual, transparent haloed, usually women, they're messengers and they can be human. It just means messengers. Haggai 1:13 and Malachi 2:7 and 3:1 show us this in the Old Testament. And now we're seeing it in Matthew 24:31. Haggai, the messenger of Yahweh, spoke by the commission of Yahweh to the people. But back then, it was the Hebrew word angel. In Malachi 2:7, the lips of a priest should preserve knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth, for he is the angel of the Lord of hosts. The word's angel, but we translate it messenger when the context tells us that it's not a spirit being. It's people carrying messages. Malachi 3:1, we just a few weeks ago spent a lot of time in Malachi 3 and 4. Behold, I'm going to send my angel, is what he actually said, and he'll clear the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger, the angel of the covenant, whom you delight, behold, he's coming, says the Lord of hosts. These two angels are John the Baptist and Jesus, respectively. They translate it messenger, but the word is angel. And we all know that we're supposed to ask ourselves when we see these words, are they human or are they spirit beings? Well, when he sends forth his angels with a great trumpet in Matthew 24:31, I think I know which one it ought to be. Let's now talk about the trumpet. It'll come about, Isaiah 2 and 3, in the last days. We had a whole lesson on last days. It'll come about in the last days, which everybody in the Gospels we're living in. The mountain of the house of Yahweh will be established as the chief of the mountains and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. It's talking about the gospel, and everybody knows it. There's no argument. Now we skip to Isaiah 27, verses 12 and 13. In that day. Now, I've jumped over a lot of chapters. You go confirm it. But in that day, Yahweh will start his threshing from the flowing stream of the Euphrates to the brook of Egypt, and you'll be gathered up one by one, O sons of Israel. Also, in that day, we've got to figure out what day it is. It's not the one you might think it is. In that day, a great trumpet will be blown. And those who were perishing in the land of Assyria and who were scattered in the land of Egypt will come and worship Yahweh in the holy mountain at Jerusalem. Well, brethren, in this case, I think it's a prophetic passage about the holy mountain in the last days that all the nations will stream to. And the great trumpet is the gospel. It's the gospel. Trumpets are all over the Old Testament. And they're used, for a wide variety of reasons. But usually they're calling people to do something of some kind. This terminology is not strange to a first century Jew. The darkened sun is a thing they know in these passages. The darkened moon is in passages we didn't look at today. The falling stars are in Daniel 3 times just in chapter 8. The shaken heavens we saw in Isaiah. Coming on the clouds, we just saw both those verses. These passages I'll leave for you to study. There's more than just these. But they are all dealing with the destruction of physical nations in a space-time continuum and leaving the planet firmly in place and spinning on its axis when they're done. I'll leave you with this. Acts 2, 16 through 21. This is what was spoken of through the prophet Joel. It shall be in the last days, God says, I will pour forth of my spirit on all mankind. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my bondslaves, both men and women, I will in those days, and we'll stop at the end of this sentence, pour forth of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. I haven't taught the class. I can direct you to those classes I taught a year or two ago down in Eugene, Oregon. If you'd like to have them, send me an email, give me a call. But the age of miracles is over, and it's been over for 2,000 years.
There are no miracles anymore. That prophecy was being fulfilled then and wasn't intended to be fulfilled after that generation. It then says, I will grant wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and glorious day of Yahweh shall come. And it shall be that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. And that is not about going to heaven. It's a this generation passage. And it's warning them that a day of darkness and blood is also coming. Remember when I took you to Isaiah 61? Jesus quoted part of it in Luke 4. That the good times were here from from Isaiah 61, and he stopped reading in the synagogue in Nazareth at that point at the beginning of his ministry. But the terrible day of the Lord that he was also to preach didn't come until now. Well, it came later in Matthew. We saw a bunch of those chapters, but lastly now in Matthew 24. So here's the deal. Read. Matthew 24 and now also chapter 25. I will labor desperately to cover all the rest of 24 and all of chapter 25 next week. How many questions were asked? 2. How many topics were involved? 1. And they were pointing at it. If there is more than one topic, where did Jesus skip over 2,000 years? Where's the transition? I maintain with enormous confidence and no conceit that God says there is no transition, and it all happened in that generation. There's only one topic: the coming of the Son of Man to end the Jewish age, when the temple is desolated by the instrument of indignation in his hand, the Roman army this time surrounding Jerusalem. Transition, brethren, I'm now adding to this chart, is everything. In the following verses, actually I should have said 24:32 through 25:46, the end of chapter 25. If there's a transition, show it to me. Where is it? Here's my assignment for the night. I'm proposing that in the course of a week, you find a total of 1 hour, just one single pitiful hour, to spend reading however many times you can get into an hour, Matthew 24:32 to the end of chapter 25, and show me that transition. I dare you. And I love you, but I dare you. Where is it? I'm an open-hearted man. I really am. But you got to have beef if you're going to change my mind. So where's the beef? Where's the transition? Find it. Now, if you can't find it in an hour, then it isn't there. If you can't find it in an hour and you're just sure it has to be there, then spend 2 or 3 hours. And if you can't find it, then don't put it in. Like 140 million people in the US of A have been led falsely to believe. Premillennialism is a lie. Seventh-day Adventism, Jehovah's Witnessism, built on it, on that sand. Where is that transition? Please find it if you can. If you still love me, you'll be back next week. Hopefully, by God's grace. I'll be here with all of you. We've got a steady group now, well over 100. Every takes 2 weeks for them to get caught up, but by the end of 2 weeks, we're well into 100. Let's make it 200 in another couple of months, all right? That's up to you. I'm doing my best. See you in a week.